Hello and welcome to Sunset Birth. My name is Sophia, and today we are going to be talking about The Business of Being Born, a 2005 documentary that I think just gives a fantastic overview of the history of birth, how birth moved into the hospital, the challenges of birth in the hospital. I just think the documentary is so powerful and I'm so excited to talk about it today. What I think is so crazy about this documentary is that it was made almost 20 years ago, which is absolutely insane. I think it is still so relevant for the challenges we're facing today. Alrighty, so now I'm gonna watch the trailer.
They want those beds filled and emptied. They don't want women hanging around in the labor room.
Technology is technology. It's not stopping. So if you're gonna have good stuff, you might as well use it to get the best outcome.
Maternity care in the United States is in crisis.
People don't have the information.
Medical decisions are being made for monetary and legal reasons, not because they're good for the mother and the baby.
This is Pitocin, which is the medication given through the IV that causes contractions.
Just check that she's on PIT. Just make sure that she's on PIT. I asked to keep upping the PIT. And if you're uncomfortable, we can always give you more.
Is this an improvement, or
The
are we
music
making
here
things
cracks me
worse?
How often do you get to see a fully natural birth?
Rarely.
Almost never.
Everywhere else in the world, you see midwives attending 70 or 80% of all the births, and the United States stands alone.
You want to talk big lobby, big dollars, they can kind of call a lot of shots.
Accusations tonight that some hospitals are not being upfront with patients who are expecting a baby.
Cesarean is extremely doctor-friendly. It's 20 minutes. And I'll be home for dinner.
Basically, what the medical profession has done is convince the vast majority of women that they don't know how to birth. If I could do that, I could do anything. To me, that's the power of birthing, and that is what we are taking away from women.
It wasn't an illness. It wasn't something that needed to be numbed. It needed to be experienced.
It was the most adventurous day I've ever had in my life.
It's awesome.
I don't even have a diaper. I don't even have a bassinet.
I have to get there. I cannot have another contraction in this taxi cab.
Switch on a light switch, and you go to the moon.
This is what I was after. This is what I wanted for my child.
Nothing compares to the privilege of giving life and the responsibility of that. Nothing.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Awesome. It has such a good balance of talking about women's real life experiences because it follows these women who are planning a home birth and actually shows footage of multiple home births, which is why I honestly do recommend it, because it's good to see, and then it balances that with footage from the hospital, interviewing doctors, really talking about the realities of the hospital and also some not so great hospital delivery experiences.
Birth looks like. Women in America don't know what's normal about birth.
They watch a baby story. They watch maternity ward. They watch these programs. I think there's a lot of fear instilled in women around birth.
Every birth that you see on
television, it's women screaming and being rushed down the hallway and looking like in an absolute dire emergency. So why should women feel confident about giving birth when the whole culture is telling them this is scary, this is dangerous?
Women expect to have traumatic experiences. That's why they're all having epidurals, because they're terrified of what this is.
The births on television are very traumatic. I would be extremely frightened too if I saw these women strapped, and there's always some sort of danger that the doctor comes in and saves that woman.
Mommy, the baby's heart rate is going a little bit down, okay? And I don't like that. So next contraction, if you're not going to push the baby out by yourself, I will help you with the vacuum.
Obviously, if people are playing the your baby's in danger card, that's it. That's when the battle is over.
Mommy, we need to deliver this baby, okay? Listen to me. You need to concentrate about your contraction. And push!
That's one of the great manipulative techniques that are used, is when a woman starts to question, wait, why do we need to do this? Wait, is there something else we can do? The first thing you turn to is, oh, it's for the good of the baby. Whether or not it is, you'll do anything, because if you go on to question it, well, then you're a bad mom.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was saying earlier, like, the manipulative tactics of doctors are sometimes beyond. I don't think any, well, that's not true. I don't think most of them are ill-willed or ill-intentioned at all. I think it's just a symptom of like how they've been trained. It's like this savior complex of like, I need to save this woman from birth when they don't. It's like they don't need saving, and recognizing what's normal and when things actually need to be intervened into, I think is a very fine line for obstetricians to walk. They always need to be like doing something or monitoring for something.
Is Drifter still doing stuff or no?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That was like the Twilight sleep cribs.
It's so awful.
It's like a torture chamber.
And look at what they did to them. It was like a straitjacket.
Oh.
Look at that.
It's
They
terrible.
like blindfolded them.
What year is this?
This is in the 20s.
The drug scopolamine was invented in Germany in the early 1900s, and American women found out about it. Remember that at that time, women were still being told that the pain of childbirth was the curse of Eve, and that it was because of Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden that women had to suffer during childbirth. So you can imagine how the modern liberated feminist attitude at the time would be, I certainly do not have to suffer. And if there are drugs around that keep me from having to suffer, then I'm going to go find those drugs because I'm a modern woman. Women thought that it took away pain during childbirth, but it doesn't. It actually just takes away your memory of the experience. So scopolamine spread rapidly across the United States. And by the 1960s, almost everyone was having twilight sleep. Now, it does take away memory, but it also takes away self-control. It takes away self-awareness. So women screamed and tried to climb the walls and spit in people's faces and tried to claw the face of the doctor or the nurse. So the hospitals developed the technique of strapping women to the hospital bed with lamb's wool, because if you used anything else, it would leave marks on their wrists, and then their husbands would want to know what was done to them. And so women were literally strapped to beds and left there for days, sometimes in their own poop and pee. It was a very brutal period.
I've seen that clip before, and I just still cannot even, I cannot even imagine. It's like women went to the hospital to have their baby. This happened to them, and then they left, not even having the memory. And I watched this video of this woman who, I think she's in her 70s or 80s, and it's her grandson, I believe, interviewing her. Maybe you guys have seen this on Instagram. But essentially, she said that what she would want from that year that her son was born was to remember the experience.
Before Chris was born?
Yeah.
Why that?
They put me out, and I would have liked to have been conscious.
Oh, for his birth?
Yeah.
They put you out?
Yes, they did. I have no recollection of any of that.
Of his born? Was he a C-section?
No.
Then how'd you have him?
Don't ask me. I don't know.
Well, I've heard you don't want to remember having a child because it's horribly painful.
No. No, it's not.
It's not?
I think that's just so powerful. And again, I'll do a whole nother video on twilight sleep, but this memory of birth is so important to women, and that essentially took it away, which is really sad. I think culturally, the phrase like women expect to have a traumatic experience, I just think that's so real. That is so real. It's like women are so scared of not only like the pain of labor, but just that they too are going to have a traumatic experience. Or, you know, like every movie that we see is these women like screaming and sweating and laying on their back and just like screaming their head off in pain. And it's like, no wonder our whole culture is scared about birth, because they don't see the other side. And I think also towards the end of the documentary, one of the, I think she's an anthropologist, she talks about how by taking away not only the pain of birth, but also with twilight sleep, where we take away the memory of birth, we are taking away the experience and the rite of passage and the strength and power a woman can experience after giving birth, to be like, yeah, I did that, you know, that was hard and I did it and I'm stronger for it. And taking away that transformative experience is what we're losing by being okay with how the system is now. That's what I'm seeing. It's like, you know, so many people are trying to change things, but it's like the harder we try to change things, the more people like don't see a problem with it. Like they don't even value birth as an experience. All they can say is like, well, healthy mom, healthy baby, which is great. I'm not saying that healthy mom and healthy baby is a bad thing to strive for, but there's so much more. There's so much more depth to birth than just the outcome of a healthy mom and healthy baby.
You know, are we benefiting mothers and babies or not?
Can I put the tube in the baby's head? Only if I can do the episiotomy. Okay.
Today, most obstetricians, most of them, have no idea of what a birth can be like.
Very few doctors have ever observed a normal birth in medical school or in the hospital. It's almost an oxymoron.
How often do you get to see a fully natural birth?
Rarely.
Almost never.
Well, I always think that midwives do a better job at the normal deliveries than we do.
Amen.
For a normal, low-risk woman, it's overkill going to a doctor. It's just too much. The doctor's not really excited about things when they're normal.
The EEG, the BP monitor, and the AVV.
Yes, needle.
And get the machine that goes...
Because obstetricians are socialized to search for pathology, they often see pathology where it doesn't exist. They find pathology because then they have something to do.
Yeah.
An obstetrician is a trained surgeon and usually very, very good at what he or she does, and thank goodness we have them. I'm so grateful that we have obstetricians.
They're surgeons. You know, they should be doing surgery all day, every day when it's needed. They should not be doing normal births because they're not trained.
I think that's just so important, like I said, that they haven't seen a normal birth, but also it's like, who decided that all these OBs are going to be attending all the births even when they're not needed? And I think not only that they're searching for pathology, but they intervene when there's not a medical reason to intervene, just for, you know, time's sake. Like, oh, you're not progressing as fast as we want, we're gonna just give you more Pitocin, or whatever that may be, which is why, as I'm a Lamaze certified childbirth educator, and Lamaze, one of the healthy birth practices that they follow is avoiding interventions that are medically necessary. And I think that's the key. It's like, yes, OBs are fantastic for when those interventions need to be done, when you need to be induced for high blood pressure or preeclampsia, or, you know, have a C-section for whatever, placenta previa, for example, when a placenta is covering the cervix completely. And I'm so grateful that we have those things, but for these women, they go in and, you know, they're fine, they're healthy, they're low risk, they don't need to be induced, for example, and yet they're being induced for no particular reason. And that's when we see what's called the cascade of interventions, which is like, okay, you go in, you get Pitocin, and then because you're on Pitocin, you have to be continuously monitored. So, you know, have the two places on your belly that they're monitoring, you know, your contractions and baby's heart rate. You have to usually have an IV for IV fluid access. Those contractions are more painful because of the Pitocin. I have a video up here you can watch on the difference between Pitocin and oxytocin. And then you're kind of limiting your movement to be close to that monitor, and you may request an epidural because of the pain, and then you know are numb from the waist down, and, you know, can't feel anything. And then, you know, the Pitocin combined with the epidural could make baby's heart rate change, and, you know, it's just this cascade of things when it's like, you know, we could have just not intervened in the first place if there wasn't a need.
Now you're lying in a bed and your labor slows down, so the hospital speeds up the process by pressuring you to take the drugs that induce labor, even though those drugs affect the heart rate of your baby and increase your pain. So then they suggest an epidural, where they jam a needle of fentanyl into your spine to numb your lower body, but now you can't feel your lower body, which means you can't help push through the contractions. And now you're slowing down your labor again. Your baby's heartbeat is going up and down. It's like a little rave inside your uterus. And the doctor comes in saying, you're not progressing enough. The baby's heartbeat is erratic. All we made you do has made everything worse. Why would you make us do all that for you? And that brings us to the biggest medical intervention of all, C-sections.
And that video is really funny, but I think The Business of Being Born does a really good job about balancing the nuance. It's really eye-opening to see those cascade of interventions. When we're talking about birth moving into the hospital, it is interesting from a global perspective that midwives attend 70 to 80% of the births in many other countries that have far better outcomes than we do. And by 1955, only 1% of births were happening at home, which is crazy. And that really came from this smear campaign against midwives, because midwives were very common in the South. They were called granny midwives, and their model really relied on the midwives passing on the information down through like apprenticing a younger midwife. And these doctors that had come over from Europe had gone through all this training, and they learned how to use forceps and like all these interventions, and they accused midwives of being filthy, ignorant, dirty, just ill-equipped to handle childbirth. And it also became this thing of like class, because women who were poor couldn't afford to give birth in the hospital. So it's like it was for the elites to have birth in the hospital in the United States. And then I'm gonna do a whole nother video on twilight sleep and more of that, but I think it really is interesting that this documentary was, it's like been 50 years since hospitals have done 99% of the births, and for what reason? It's overkill for these OBs to be attending normal, healthy deliveries. Midwives are the ones who are trained in those births and to identify if there's a reason to transfer to higher levels of care. But I think as someone who really is passionate about midwifery, I just feel for the midwives who, were in that era of just being bullied essentially by these OBs coming in, and they were just doing the best that they could for women, and they would accuse them of being dirty, but it's like, we didn't even have antibiotics until 1945, until penicillin was widely available. And women would get so many infections from the hospital because they were, reusing forceps that were, used for all these things. And lots of moms and babies died in the hospital. So I think just putting that context into place really helps us now look back and be like, maybe it's not that home birth was unsafe, but that hospitals took it over, had poor outcomes, and then blamed, the midwives for it, which I think is happening in some degree today as well. I had to reheat my coffee because I've been filming for so long. I feel like this video is gonna be so long, but it's fine. It's whatever. I signed up for that. My favorite quote from that is, "The system is convincing women that they don't know how to birth." And I think that's so powerful, because we've been so convinced that we need these medical interventions in order to give birth. And there are times when those interventions are necessary for whatever reason, but 99% of the time, we don't need those interventions for labor and birth to happen and to evolve, and for the process to occur. So I just think that's really sad. And talking to my friends and a lot of other women who, like, I haven't given birth yet. All of my friends, a lot of them are having either their first babies or haven't had babies yet. And I just think that it's so interesting how we've just grown so accustomed to like, oh, you need to go to the hospital. Like, there's no other way of doing it. And I think the conversation has been more open in recent years, but it's still, I feel like, just as stuck as it was in 2005 when they made this documentary of, there's just this culture of trauma and fear, and that's convincing us that we can't do it. You can hold two things at the same time. You can hold that birth is unpredictable, and also there's a beautiful physiologic design that I believe that God designed for birth. And some women have critiqued, and I think rightfully so, the phrase like, your body knows how to birth, because they're like, oh, if I needed medical intervention or if I needed a C-section, like, does that mean my body doesn't know how? And it's not that, it's balancing the fact that birth is unpredictable, and I'm so grateful that we have the medical interventions that we do. One of the midwives even says in the documentary, like, I'm so glad that we have OBs, but OBs are surgeons, and we don't need them for most of the birth that occurs. Most women are low risk, not gonna need a hospital, and hospitals are overkill for those women. I talk to a lot of women who want to have a natural birth in the hospital, and I think that's totally valid. I actually have a free resource that you can find in my description on a 10-step guide to have a natural birth in the hospital. But I really want to emphasize too that most obstetricians have never seen in their training an unmedicated, purely natural, like physiologic birth, and not even just like without an epidural. Like, that's not what I mean really by a natural birth, but one that wasn't induced, one that was also unmedicated, one where she was moving freely in, you know, in the room, things like that, like physiologic pushing, not pushing on the back. All those factors go into what I consider my definition of natural birth. Some people are like, oh, by natural, do you just mean like without pain meds? I hope that gives some perspective for those watching and not familiar with that term. When you have an obstetrician caring for you, just know, just being aware, like, oh, they probably haven't seen a birth like that. And you can even ask them, you know, how many unmedicated or natural births have you witnessed either in your training or your practice? And I also recommend in the free resource to find a nurse midwife at the hospital, because sometimes, you know, they are a slave to the system and the policies and the protocols at that hospital, but midwives are trained more in caring for low risk, normal, natural birth processes. Would recommend that all of you go find a way to watch Business of Being Born. It's by filmmakers Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein. They are just fantastic for bringing awareness. They also have a newer documentary that came out in 2020 called The Business of Birth Control, which I do want to talk about on this channel, because I also think that just the topics that they're bringing awareness to are so important, and I think that every woman should watch both of those documentaries because they are just so relevant to our life. And even if you never want to have kids yourself, I guarantee you that you will know someone who is going to have a baby. And I just think being able to have these conversations is so important. A lot of women have birth trauma, like they have traumatic experiences from their deliveries, and they need space to talk about those things, and for people to understand or contextualize what happened to them, not just to the things that happened to them, but how they were treated, what was said to them, about them, how things were handled. We have more compassion for also women who have had C-sections, because it ends with one of the filmmakers having like needing a C-section, and I think that also offers like some nuance, and seeing her experience and how that changed her and just her reflections on it were really beautiful. This video is kicking off a new series on my channel called The History of Birth. So this is episode 1. Fun fact, I was a history major in undergrad, and I can just nerd out about the history of birth for hours. I wrote my thesis on the history of nurse midwifery, and I just think it's so fascinating when we look at history, even from like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and just how midwives have been talked about throughout history. And then when we get to the United States, how midwives and, you know, doctors interacted in those early days when doctors weren't even a thing, and how that has really impacted the birth sphere ever since. So have you seen Business of Being Born? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any more videos as I continue this history of birth series, and also post more videos helping you feel peaceful, prepared, and confident for birth. I will see you guys next time.